Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and it seems like there are a lot of new resins coming out for doll making, so I'm testing another one today. This one is the High Impact BJD resin from FunCreCol, and they sent it to me in 3 colors so I could give it a try and let you know how it works. I'm starting with the pink color, and on the top I see it comes with a little jar of UV putty. I had to look this up because I haven't used it before, but this is for repairing breakage and cracks and gluing pieces together to complete models. It's just a clear putty that cures in UV light, and it's got sandpaper and a little applicator stick in there. I think this will be really useful. So the lid of the bottle has a label with the color. This one is labeled Mia Pink. I know that's a popular resin color, but I don't have anything like it to compare to. The side of the bottle says soft pink. The bottle and packaging don't show any settings, but the company's R&D team recommended 60 seconds for base layers and 3 seconds for regular layers, which seemed a little high to me since that was an across-the-board recommendation for all 3 colors. I kept the base layers at 60 and turned the regular layer exposure down to 2.5, which is fairly average for impact-resistant resin, and I tried a few test pieces. It turned out well, so the next day I filled up the vat again and picked something bigger to print. This resin is substantially lower viscosity than other BJD resins I've seen, which will probably make it a lot more friendly to printing in cold weather, when thick resins can be a problem. This was a really long process, and at first I ran into a little trouble. Don't get me wrong, the print quality was beautiful. It did great at picking up details, but I found after printing, the pink was really brittle with the settings I used, and I ended up having quite a few pieces that cracked when I was removing the supports. The main takeaway here is that I was a little too quick to dive into printing something big, and this means I need to do more testing and discuss the issues with the company. Anytime you're trying something that's relatively new to market, there are going to be a few hiccups. This break was pretty clean, so I'll probably be able to repair it with the UV putty they included. It won't be perfect, but it will be usable and probably won't show a lot. This was one of the first pieces I washed and cleaned, so going forward I used a lot more care in trimming supports. I didn't see directions for post-cure times on this resin, but most impact-resistant resins range from 5 to 10 minutes. Less than that and they'll be sticky. With the rest of the pieces, since the whole doll was already printed, I made a point of ensuring every single support was manually trimmed with as much care as possible to prevent breakage. But sometimes color formulation does matter, so while I waited for feedback from the company on the settings I used, I decided to start printing test pieces from the other 2 colors. The next color they sent me is labeled Light Skin, and this is slightly less pink and more beige, though the difference isn't huge. This one was a little closer to my NS Impel doll, though still a little bit pinker. For the sake of consistency, I printed an arm from my doll body using the same settings that I had used for the pink color, and the results on this one were a lot better. Just in taking these off the build plate, I could already tell it wasn't brittle because I didn't have any supports cracking or edges chipping on the rafts. I still cut the pieces off the supports with a lot of care, but this color with those settings worked really well. Ultimately, I was able to get the supports off without damage to the parts, and while sanding might be a little more involved when removing supports this way, I'd much rather do a little more work and not have to fix any chips or breaks. But the color is so similar. What could make this one turn out so differently? That's a mystery we'll be solving soon. The last color to test is the tan shade, which is labeled Burning Skin, and it is a very fiery orange-red tan. This color was the thinnest viscosity of all, but heavily pigmented colors are always a little bit harder to print. My first few tests failed either on the raft or at the base of the supports. The location of these failures told me that the base layer exposure wasn't high enough, and I needed more transition layers. This resin would not print at the 2.5 second standard exposure I tried for the other 2, so I increased it to the original recommendation of 3 seconds, and that turned out beautifully. Before I moved on to the next stage of testing, which is sanding and checking for joint powdering, I went back to my bottle of pink resin. The color was so similar to the light skin resin that I felt there had to be something else going on for me to get good results from one but not the other. I dropped the layer exposure from 2.5 to 2 and tried again and got much better results. It greatly reduced the brittleness, and the mini pieces I printed for the sake of resin conservation were a lot less fragile. So the simple answer is that the initial 3 seconds just gave me overexposed parts that turned out more fragile. But what made the pink behave that way when the light skin color didn't? There could be a few reasons. It could be the pigment in the pink resin responds differently to curing. It could also be affected by the age of the resin. According to the date on the bottle, the pink was manufactured about a year ago, while the light skin color was manufactured just a few months ago. So it's possible that particular bottle of resin is near the end of its shelf life, which can sometimes affect how a resin prints. In this case, it could mean that older resin cures faster. Either way, it's a good example of why it's so important to do a lot of testing and calibration for your individual printer to find what works best in your printing environment. Be sure to run plenty of tests to make sure you're getting results you're completely happy with before you dive into printing a large project. Even though the older pink resin was a little trickier to work with, tweaking my settings to suit this specific bottle of resin gave great printing results in the end. After everything was printed, it was time to leave my parts for a day so they could rest and complete the chemical bonding that comes from curing, and sanding all 3 colors to test the fit and durability started the next day. I'll be sanding my tiny test parts too, just to see the difference the exposure time made, but this doll really wasn't designed to be printed at such a small scale, so there are some paper thin bits on her upper arm that I know I'm going to break while I handle it. That's not really a durability issue, just a design issue, so hold that against my sculpting and not the resin. So first things first, I go in with files and clean up the elbow piece of the pink arm. This is from the original brittle print, and I'm delighted to say that even though it was brittle right after printing, the post-curing process really helped this print. It sands easily and smoothly, and I don't have any issues at all with chipping as I sand. I get a good finish with 600 grit sandpaper, no discoloration from sanding, and then I rub the joints together real hard to see what happens. Since this was the one printed with wrong settings that caused the parts to be fragile when fresh out of the printer, I didn't expect great results, but for the most part, it did fine. Regular friction caused no powdering or wear. I was able to scratch it a bit when I bent the elbow back so the edge of the upper arm dug in, but I'm blaming that on the print settings I used specifically because I didn't have the same problem on the tiny arm that I printed with the lower exposure settings. So if you overexpose your pieces, you might have similar results, and that's a great indicator that you need to dial down your settings a bit to optimize for this resin. The strength of these parts remained very good in spite of the early brittleness issues, and the lower elbow piece popped into the arm without any damage. No signs of stress, no cracks, no powdering or scraping, nothing. Here I've got the revised tiny print with the lower exposure settings, and you can see this one doesn't powder at all, even when I try to scrape it against the edge. So in short, if you do have issues with powdering in the joints, your print settings aren't quite right, and perfecting them will help a lot. The second set of pieces I finish is the tan ones, and sanding tan resin is always fraught because it looks so bad anytime you rough up that surface. But I found this one even easier to sand than the pink resin, and once I finished sanding and wiped it with a damp melamine sponge, there was no discoloration from the sanding. Honestly, super impressive. As long as you're working down properly through grits, there shouldn't be any marks. I kinda held my breath on this one because tan printed resins rarely do well with friction, and when I scraped this bad boy together real hard and got no marks or powder at all, I was stoked. Instantly, one of my favorite resins to work with. Seriously, this tan was so easy to use. The only problem I encountered was I missed a little bump inside my lower arm piece, and it was sharp enough that it scratched the elbow. So make sure you really sand your joints properly because no resin is immune to getting scratched by something you forgot to sand off, and the darker the pigment, the more easily those scratches will show. Powdering though, not a bit. The only dust here is what's left from my sanding job, and that is wonderful. Last up is the light skin resin, which still doesn't look that different from the pink to me, but I guess it is a bit more ivory or beige. Just like the others, this sands up really easily. I work through the same files and grits of sandpaper, wipe it clean, and fit it together. The 2.5 seconds exposure time on this one is just fine. No issues with scraping or scratching or powdering at all. No problems with the joint that has to pop together either. All these resins have a really nice texture, and I can't wait to get more pieces printed up with them. Especially this tan. Oh my gosh, I love this color. These colors are different from other BJD resins on the market, which is great for expanding your options in color matching or developing your own signature look. So overall, I'd say this resin test has been successful. The pink threw some challenges at me at first, but once I got over those settings hurdles, it was much easier to work with and gave me some good results as well. I'm honestly kind of glad that I got to do so much experimenting with it to find what gave me the best results, because I feel like it lets me give you much better information about how to solve similar issues and get the best doll prints you can. Another positive was that while I worked to perfect my settings, the company was very responsive and helpful in finding solutions, and it's always nice to have good customer service. I'll definitely be getting more of the tan because I loved how easy it was to work with, and the color is so pretty in person. If you want to try this resin for yourself, there's a link in the video description below. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.